Welcome to the UU West Side congregation. We're going to spend some time together here today. During the pandemic, we're a virtual community, but we are a community that cares about each other and about the world. My name's Carol Eaglehart, and our special guest today is Mary Oishi, Albuquerque's new poet laureate. I think you're really going to enjoy her. So grab your favorite beverage and settle in. And along with your favorite beverage, I'll ask you to have a glass of water nearby, because this is the time of year that we usually celebrate what we call water communion. And we're going to use that glass of water a little bit later in the service. So if you don't have one handy, hit the pause button and go and get one, and we'll wait. Okay, is everybody ready? Then take a nice deep breath. And let's center ourselves for a moment. You can close your eyes or keep them open, whatever is most comfortable for you. But breathe and begin to let go of any tension you might feel in your body. Breathe and let yourself relax. Breathe and find that place deep inside yourself, that quiet place. Stay in that place for a moment, feeling the sense of peace and wholeness. May peace flow throughout your body. May it fill your day and spill over onto everyone you meet. Blessed be. As Unitarian Universalists, we don't have dogma, but we do have principles that we live by. Today's service is based on Principle 2, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. Each Sunday, we have a time in our service to catch everybody up on what's happening. So one thing we want to tell you about today is our Little Free Libraries project. We've launched a project of having little free libraries for children scattered all over Rio Rancho. Now, we need people to help build the little library structures, so if you have any carpentry skills, then volunteer to help with that. Or maybe you have some building supplies. We need those too. We're also going to need people to do some fundraising, and of course, people to help acquire the books. So let Reverend Nancy know how you're going to choose to help out. Speaking of Reverend Nancy, she's on a well-deserved vacation until September the 20th. But if you need her for urgent pastoral concerns, you can call her. If you have any other questions or concerns, please contact Steve Poyani or any other member of the board. We also have another project going. It's a video history project about our congregation. For those of you who are old-timers, we're going to need your photos and your memories to help us put our history together. And for those of you who are newer to our congregation, we need to find out what it is that you'd like to know about our past and how it impacts our present and our future. So get in touch with Laurel Anderson or me. We'd like to hear from you. It's a tradition in UU congregations that each week we light a flaming chalice. That chalice became a symbol during World War II for the people helping refugees from Nazi persecution. And it remains a symbol for us today. Join your voices now for our chalice lighting. We light our chalice as a beacon of hope, shining a light for justice in our world. Shalom. Each week we also speak our affirmation together. Life is a gift. We gather in community to celebrate the glories and the mysteries of this great gift. In the light of truth and in the warmth of love, we gather to seek, to sustain, and to share. Love is the doctrine of this congregation. The quest for truth is our sacrament, and service is our prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve others in community, to the end that all souls grow into harmony with creation. Thus do we covenant with one another. Another tradition we have each week is kind of fun. I know I always look forward to it, and I think you do too. Bramcast Hecht has an animal ministry moment for us, reminding us of the creatures who share this world with us.
Hi. The word horse. The very word brings to mind power, beauty, wildness, freedom, and passion. Who are these beings? They are flesh, blood, bone, and spirit. Horses are individual souls growing and evolving from one life to the next, just like humans are. Horses are capable of complex thoughts, emotions, and decisions. They are fiercely loyal and committed. They give us tremendous gifts if we only allowed ourselves to be open to them. Now, this is a little dog, and the owner asked why he twitches in his sleep. You asked why I twitch. Which twitch are you talking about? The twitch as I evade some airborne cat in my leashless dreams? Or the twitch I twitch if there's a glitch in my fantasy of winning best in show? Or is it the twitch I twitch as the pitch I pitch in some canine all-star game is lined back at my snout? And I know in a second I'll be knocked out.
We'd like to take this time to say thanks. Thanks to all of you who are continuing to keep your pledges coming in. We may not be meeting together in this building, but that doesn't mean our expenses have stopped. So thanks for everything that you do. Each week, we set aside time to share our joys and concerns and light a candle for each one. Our first candle is a candle of joy for Jimmy Stevens. He has a new diagnosis and a new treatment, and he's feeling much better. Today, we light a candle of concern for the children returning to school and the teachers who are trying to cope with a whole new way of teaching. We also light a candle for those who continue to protest in our streets, that their voices may be heard and that they may be met with understanding. We light a candle for all those who are struggling through this pandemic, those who are sick, and those who have lost loved ones. And we light a candle of joy for Donna and Gary Johnston, who just celebrated their 40th anniversary. This is a picture of them 40 years ago. We light one final white candle for the joys and concerns we hold silently in our hearts. And we light our special red candle for the victims of racial violence, for their struggle and for their lives. Shalom. We miss seeing each other every week, so we started a new tradition this summer, a moment for friends and family. Every week, we feature a different person in our congregation. Today, it's Judy Deutsch.
High on a hill overlooking Corrales is the home of Judy Deutsch. There's something going on in the garage. Judy's playing ping pong. At age 91, she hasn't stopped being active or being an activist. To know Judy is to know she's been on the front lines of social action.
I think it has to do with my Jewish conservative Sunday school. I was really impressed by what Isaiah and Amos and all those people said about, there shouldn't be people having so very much and people having so very little. I think they convinced me.
I asked her which of her many political causes is dearest to her heart.
I think Medicare for all. I've been interested in single-payer healthcare since '45 when Truman introduced it. It just seems crazy to me that this country doesn't have healthcare, good healthcare, affordable healthcare for everybody.
Another cause close to her heart is housing.
I've worked a lot in housing, and it also seems crazy to me that there are so many homeless people. It just seems so unfair. Well, I belong to the NAACP since about 1947, and I've belonged to the ACLU since about 1955. All those things mean so much to me.
She abandoned her Jewish Sunday school at age 15 after extensive reading and became an atheist. She became involved in the Ethical Culture Society, then later in Unitarian Universalism. She went from being director of religious education to a full UU minister, serving churches in Connecticut and Massachusetts.
I was able in all my ministries to do a lot of social action work. I know that there's enough money in this country for everybody to live decently. And it doesn't make sense to me for people to have so very much that they and their children are never going to use.
2 years ago, she went to El Paso to help with refugees. And at demonstrations, she puts on her political hat and sings with the raging grannies. Even with her dedication to social action, Judy has known how to take time to have fun. She and her late husband, Marshall, were married for 70 years. Their first or second date was folk dancing, and they danced their way through those 70 years. She has a closet full of dance costumes, and she still dances. But she misses live folk dancing during the pandemic. It just doesn't feel the same on Zoom. We wish Judy well in her dancing, her ping pong, and her political causes. We're glad to have an activist in our midst.
Each year about this time, we celebrate what we call Water Communion, an ingathering of waters representing how we've been spending the summer and what's been happening in our lives. Usually at that time, we bring a little container of water with us on Sunday morning and pour it into a bowl, telling everyone what that water represents for us. In the past, some people have brought water from their travels, but none of us have been doing very much of that this summer. So think for a moment. If you were bringing water today, what water would that be? And what would it represent in your life? I'll give you time to think about that while we have a musical meditation on water. So what does your container of water represent today? What does it mean in your life? Imagine that your water is in this pitcher now, and that it's being poured with the water from other people into this bowl. We gather our waters together, mingling them as we mingle our lives in this congregation, sharing who we are and what we're going through, drawing strength from each other. Now, take up your glass of water. We who live in the desert know how precious water is. May this glass of water represent the mingled water of our community, refreshing our parched souls, renewing our lives, giving us new strength. Let's all take a sip together. To life. I'm glad that you'll get to know our special guest, Mary Oishi, today.
Some of you may already be familiar with her radio programs on KUNM and on KSFR in Santa Fe, where she currently hosts a blues show on Thursdays.
Her schedule's very full now that she's the new poet laureate, but she agreed to meet me in a park in the southeast part of Albuquerque. Sometimes our conversation was interrupted by the sound of cars and motorcycles and even airplanes. And to our surprise, the cicadas in the trees started to sing and almost drowned us out at one point. But I think you'll find her delightful. One thing you need to know about Mary is that she is Japanese American, the daughter of an American soldier and a Japanese war bride. But through a bizarre set of circumstances, she ended up being raised by two white supremacists surrounded by the Ku Klux Klan. I asked her to tell us how that happened.
My father was a Mennonite farm boy, one of 17 children. He was one of the older ones. And so he was doing bad things, according to his dad. He was going to like Hank Williams concerts, ooh, stuff like that. And so his dad said, you either straighten up or get out. And so my dad got out. And he was 17 years old and he joined the military and ended up in Tokyo in the honor guard, and he was General MacArthur's wife's chauffeur. So my mother was from a very prominent Japanese family. And in fact, when I went to Japan and they saw my name, they bumped me from coach to first class for my return flight, which kind of surprised. It was surreal. It was the first time I ever flew first class. But anyway, so my mother thought that my father was there at the embassy and he had this, you know, he was driving this fancy limousine. He had use of the theater and the pool and everything at the embassy. And so she was of the mistaken notion that he was wealthy and powerful, and he wasn't. You know, he told her his dad had hundreds of acres of land, which is true, but he was a Mennonite farmer, not quite what my mother had in mind. So she married him, came over here, and had my older brother in the Bay Area of California. That's where they lived. It took him a year to get her over here because the U.S. government didn't really want Japanese people to come here. So, and then he got homesick and his dad offered him to stay in this little kind of bungalow, like 2-bedroom little house that he owned. And so he talked her into going there, and she didn't want to leave the Bay Area, but she said, well, I'll go as long as you'll promise me if I don't like it in a year, I can come back. And so she was surrounded by Mennonites. She had lived in Tokyo since she was 10. And had her own radio show in Tokyo, so I kind of took after her in that way. And anyway, her mother had a degree in international law from a school in Paris. And her grandmother owned the first finishing school for women, called Oishi School for Women, in northern Japan, in Hokkaido. So, you know, they were a well-known family. anyhow, she told me the emperor sent flowers to her grandmother's funeral. So that's the kind of prominence they had. So here she is living on the edge of this Mennonite farm, and they're trying to convert her to a Mennonite. And when she would go into the stores in town, which was a sundown town where black people weren't allowed to spend the night, there were a lot of those in the north actually. And this was in central Pennsylvania, in Pennsylvania Dutch country. So she was really disgusted. I was born there in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, but she wanted to go back after a year, and I was only 6 months old. So he had a brother who was ostracized also, and the Mennonites at that time practiced shunning. So if you were once a member and you left the church, then you had to sit at a separate table, and it was to try to get you to come back, you know, to the faith. And so my father was excommunicated because he joined the military, which they were a pacifist church, right? And then my uncle who married this Appalachian holy roller whose parents met at a Klan rally, she couldn't have any children because she had had a hysterectomy when she was 16. So they would get together just by virtue of the fact that they were black sheep of the family. And so this woman wanted a baby so badly, she didn't care how she got one. One couple moved to Florida to get away from her because she was trying to get their baby away from them. She was like obsessed with getting a baby so she would be a real woman, in her opinion. So neither of them had gone past 8th grade. I mean, she actually went part of 9th grade and dropped out. So they were uneducated and really poor. And she was hooked on morphine ever since her hysterectomy when she was 16. So it was not a good situation. But she talked my mother into letting me there, because my mother was pregnant again with my younger brother. And she talked her into letting me there. It was supposed to be just temporary till they got resituated in California, because they went back to the Bay Area. So it turned out that she wouldn't send me back. They sent the money twice, and they spent it on her morphine.
So Mary was stuck growing up with these two people who were not only racist and addicted, but also mentally ill. In one poem, she describes it as the nightmare that wouldn't stop.
I was very cut off from my culture, and when I went to school in the town where black people couldn't spend the night, I was the only child there who had anything other than European blood. So my Mennonite grandpa was the township supervisor outside of town, but that didn't matter because I would get harassed every day. And so a lot of my early writing was to try to find my culture, you know, to try to find my the root that had been severed, you know. And eventually I took my mother's name as my last name, which I had no idea at that time that her ancestor was such a famous samurai. You know, I just wanted to go back in the matrilineage as far as I could. And I got to know my mother before she died. We became pretty close the last 2 years of her life. But I asked her, you know, what was your mother's name? Like, I wanted to go back as far as I could. And she said, oh, you don't want that name. You want Oishi. And I said, why? And she said, because that's a samurai name. So I took that name, and I'm very glad I did. I learned the history of the family, and it's quite exciting, quite interesting. So this book has a lot of the autobiographical poems in it. Not so much in this one, the next one I wrote. But so I could read one from this one that's autobiographical. And of course it's a little bit political too, just because I can't help myself, you know, and digging my way out of that morass of ignorance, I really had to do a lot of work. So this is called Flat Earth White People. Mom used a lot of bleach when she washed her sheets. They came out really, really white. Salt is white. Before the dogs get to it, snow is white. Clouds are sometimes gray, but the big puffy ones are always white. I used to lie on the ground so still, I thought I could feel the earth slowly turning under them. Mom's parents used to sew those sheets into robes and pointed hats because they thought they themselves were white, thought God was white, even told me I was half white. They learned this from their ancestors who never ventured this way until the earth had finally become round for several centuries. Guess they never got real still under the clouds or in front of the mirror. That's one of the things I wrote about growing up with the Klan.
With the Klan, yeah.
So I've spent my life pretty much working for social justice, human rights. I was a delegate to the UN World Conference Against Racism in Durban, South Africa in 2001. And I've just been fighting for a lot of causes. And then I got into public radio kind of by accident in the mid-90s, and that got in my blood. And that just, that suited my conscience and just and my performance nature. I mean, because the Pilgrim Holiness Church, which is where I was taken all my growing up years, it was a little tiny church in Muir, Pennsylvania, which isn't even on the map, but it's in the Appalachian Mountains. And they would stand me up in front of the church. I mean, from the time I was 3 years old. And so performance to me is like, it's as easy as brushing my teeth, maybe easier. Because this is what they did. And so it was all people I knew, and they're like, the little Jap can sing, the little Jap can, preach. I preached my first sermon when I was 7. And it's funny, I came out to the woman who raised me when I was in my 20s, and she said, "Do you remember when you used to preach?" And I said, "Yes, and I remember my first sermon, my first text." And I said, "If I were to preach today, it would be the same one." It was from Matthew's Gospel, and it was, "Ye blind guides, which strain at a gnat and swallow a camel." And boy, do we have a lot of camel swallowing right now, right?
Right.
So my biological father and I became very, very close. And he was a rebel, and I'm a rebel too. I mean, I kind of more agree with my grandparents in terms of war, but my dad gave me permission to tell them all, I'm not going to buy into your fundamentalism, right? So anyway, but I do think that right now there is so much hypocrisy. I mean, it goes way deeper than Falwell. I mean, all these people who are fine with children being torn from their parents and put in cages, and I know the pain of what happens when you get taken from your mother, and how much damage it does, and how many years you have to work on that, of therapy and worrying about being rejected, So this is the poem that I wrote about how it is these days to be in the United States. These days I need poems between my fingers, balking my pillows, spinning off the ceiling fan. I need poems to sweet the oatmeal, to cream the morning coffee. I need cupboards so full of poems you couldn't squeeze in another can of soup. I need a poem to lock my door, to start my car. I need poems to bubble up through the storm drains on my way to more poems, an office full of poems. I need poems to populate my screens, to ring my phone. I need poems to jump into the headlines in Arial black 200-point type, push out all that is not poem. I need a world of poems, a 7 billion voice poem, speaking through 14 billion eyes. I need trillions of poems twinkling at me across light years. I need poems, 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 a universe of nothing but, just to keep the light on, just to keep my head in a world gone mad, mad, mad. I also think that poets are, in a way, prophets. And that's not to set us above other people, but to set us kind of aside, in that I think we're off on a ledge somewhere looking at what's going on, and we can clearly see, because we're not down in the details of it, we're really seeing clearly what's happening. And in that way, we're great truth tellers. And I think sometimes the truths that people already know, they just haven't articulated it. But one of the things that happened when Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson, and all that upheaval happened as a result of that, I kind of saw that this was different than the way it used to be, and what precipitated this and how quickly it spread. And I thought, this is going to happen again, and it's going to be significant. And so I wrote this poem August 2014. This I wrote right around the time of Ferguson. It's in my book Rock, Paper, Scissors that I share with my daughter. Someone needs to take a rag to this month, sop it up good. Grab the first day in her left hand, the last day in her right, and twist hard. Wring out the blood, the tears, the horror. Shake it out. Take a long, square look at what we've really got. Oh, August, you have executed us in the street on our way to college, kept us cordoned off from our desperate mother for hours. You have made our suicide quick and homicide in a barrage of bullets after our too soon discharge in front of an uncle who wanted to intervene but was warned away moments before you fired. Your false accusations have not blinded us, August. We witnessed your repeated claim to victimhood, with weapons still smoking in unrepentant hands, with your "I kill everybody" smirking at us from YouTube, with the parents of the real victims grieving all over our Facebook wall. You have threatened our journalists, August. You have brought out your armored personnel carriers when we raised our hands and cried, "Don't shoot," when we screamed, "No more." Oh, the personal is political, August, and you have brought it all home. Because this is 2014. There is no media blackout. These days, the whole world's closer than Dan Rather in Vietnam could ever be. Reporters embedded on every street, in every parking lot. Ferguson right up in our face, August. Your next cruel move already in our cell phone's eye, an eye that never sleeps. Be careful, September. The people are watching. This was kind of my signature poem from this book. I am a poet to reclaim the ravages of war, to amplify the human heartbeat in the chest of the enemy, to remind the soldier that he once was a child who dissolved into sobs at the death of a dog. I am a poet to reclaim the ravages of war, reigned by one race, one religion on another, sometimes between nations, sometimes within them. I cut all skins and mingle the red blood indistinguishable on the page. I fuse all prayers into one chant of longing for a justice, a goodness that yet eludes us. I am a poet to reclaim the ravages of war, to pluck the child from beneath the bruising arm of rage, to pluck the woman from the path of rape's intruding missile, to hold them up in sun-drenched mist, where they can sparkle golden and untarnished as the day they burst this world a breath of God. I am a poet to reclaim humanity from the ravages of war, not to count the casualties, but to heal them. I am a poet, and my task is immense. I cannot do it alone, but an army of poets can kiss the world awake. So in an effort to recruit an army of poets, my project as poet laureate is to go to various libraries throughout the city. There's 19 of them. So I'm going to go to each one throughout the coming 2 years of my tenure. And I'm going to invite a neighborhood poet, at least one, maybe two, who live near that library to come and feature with me, where we each read a few poems. And then I'm going to invite all the people from the neighborhood to come up and read their own poetry. Because I think if we democratize art, if we can spread poetry and get people to write poetry and express their feelings and their understanding of things, I think that it will be a really healing thing to have happen during and after the pandemic. Hopefully there's an after. But so while it's still unsafe to meet in public, we are going to do it virtually. So keep your ears open for this. I'll let you know about it. In each library, like Ernie Pyle, Los Griegos, the main library, the Special Collections Library, libraries all over the city, these readings will happen about once a month. And again, it will be virtual first at the smaller libraries where they really don't have a performance space anyway. And hopefully by the time we're through those, we'll be able to do it actually live in the library. So to me, it's to promote poetry. And wow, if everybody in the city wrote poetry, you know, there would be very little contention, I think. I wrote this one for my dad who raised me. It's called Father's Day. I heard a man whistle a strong tune in a parking lot. My dad whistled so much, Whistle was his nickname. Funny how you can hate your dad so intensely. You plot ways to kill him just prior to falling into adolescent sleep. Yet you love your dad so much that a decade after his death, your impulse is to run to a whistling stranger. I read this one at the Women's March the day after the inauguration. This was also translated into Spanish for a Spanish language website. So, yeah. Women, when we rise heaving, panting, pushing, screaming like Big Bang birthing when we rise. Women, when we rise against pain, through pain, through pain, through more pain than one body can stand, it seems. Women, when we rise, it's never just one resurrection. It's always bringing more life with it, pulling the whole underworld along. It's bursting tombs into seedlings and springtime and singing tomorrows when we rise. Women, when we rise, Truth Mountain's shadow darkened for centuries, burst watermelon and high-lit ribs, plain as day for 100 miles when we rise. Women, when we rise, secrets cry out from crevices, sulfured springs transformed to sparkling. What once was poison now is fuel for still more rising when we rise. Women, when we rise, there is no wind can take us down, tethered as we are to moon and mystery. Women, when we rise, all else is trifled, all the foulest deeds of greed and war, all fears that spawn them gone when women find their power. Women, when we rise together, out of bones unnamed and cries forgotten, bonded to ourselves like witch to stake, like slave to chain, like Hiroshima vapor to the stone, like Wada's blood to desert sand. But when we rise, we bring them every soul from the first mother forward, and goddess breath will roar from us forever when we rise. Women, when we rise, we must not, cannot, will not be put down again. When women rise, when women rise. I have two very distinctive voices as a poet. One is kind of the Japanese ancestry stuff coming in through my DNA, I guess. And that is, you know, things like Father's Day and like the Jesus and Jesus in the Walmart. It's very stark. It's almost like a line drawing, you know, where there's all spaces in between the lines are just as important as the lines themselves, kind of, where the listener or the reader has to fill in those things with their own feelings and their own experiences. And then there's the ones like Women When We Rise, or like You Are Here, about, you survived, right? And that those are more like the gospel preacher, where from all those years of Sunday mornings and Sunday nights and midweek prayer meeting and revival meetings and camp meetings, sitting there listening to those preachers and that cadence, it's almost hypnotic. And that got in me too. So my poems will be completely different because it depends which voice they're coming through. And I sent a manuscript away to a publisher, and she said, I only publish poems that I think people are going to read 50 years from now, and these qualify, but you are like two different people. Because your voice is completely different, two completely different voices. And I say, yeah, and that's because of, who I am and how I was raised. So, I see, for many years I was resentful and almost angry about how I was raised, and but at this point in my life, I feel I've come to peace with it because it gave me gifts as well. That I'm not afraid to get up in front of people, and a lot of people are afraid to do that. I love it. I absolutely love it. And also, it gave me the one voice of my poetry that I could say at the Women's March, and it was like they were hearing it from a preacher, so it helped people. We needed that re-empowerment the day after, and we're going to need it going into this fall, that's for sure. So let's hope we can save our society from sliding into complete and utter authoritarianism, and we'll all have to shore ourselves up, so poetry will help us to do that. Thanks for having me. So I always like to end with hope, so this is my End with Hope poem. Yes, others get unearned advantages. You are advantaged too. Ancestor to ancestor, goblet to goblet, poured strength to strength through generations, centuries tested, multiplied strength to strength to strength, poured into you. That's how you squeezed into this life, equipped. Yes, others get unearned accolades, but what reward is higher than that you are here, when so many times you should have died? In that dark room alone, in that dark room with someone who should have never been in charge. You are here, hearing these words, so listen well. What gold trophy glory can match the fact that you are here? Less equipped you would have died when that crazy man grabbed you in the street, when waters rose, when fevers raged, when you got that shocking news, when you were completely betrayed, when your heart was utterly broken. Not even priest or wizard could take such blood-red sorrow, paint this day in blues, and turn it royal purple. You should have died. You should have died so many times I cannot count them all. You should have died, but here you are, still here, still here, still dancing.
We are grateful for this time together and for having a chance to meet Mary and hear about her life. As always, we love feedback, so email us or post your comments on our Facebook page, our website, or on YouTube. It's time now to extinguish our flaming chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the fire in our hearts. May that continue to burn for justice in our world. Our time together is ending, but may you go out into the world with hope, reaching out to those in need and raising your voice to speak out for justice. Blessed be.